Welcome to the show. Welcome to this special edition of Mysterious Forces with Natasha Nyxx. This is part 2 of my interview with Richard Dolan. This interview was recorded on June 1st, 2018. This was the first day of contact in the desert, and this was the first interview that Richard granted on that day. And he did a great job. It was my first interview, and I was really nervous, and you can hear it in my voice. And in spite of my poor performance, Richard did an amazing job. He carried this interview all the way through. He gave very cogent answers to my questions, and he extrapolated on them and just gave a terrific interview. I know you're going to enjoy this. I'm not even going to do any spoiler alerts. Just kick back, listen to this interview, and enjoy it. Thank you very much. So I understand that you're going to be doing a new lecture tomorrow night, which by the time this show is broadcast, it'll be old news, but it's new to us right here, right now. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you're going to be disclosing?
Sure. I don't think it'll be old news by then. I don't know how much attention it's going to be getting right away, but yes, this is a lecture that actually I've been wanting to do a book on this, but I haven't gotten around to doing it as a book, so I thought, well, I'll just do the lecture. And it's on the New Age movement as a kind of psyop. As a kind of psychological operation, and in particular, how I think in many ways it has derailed the proper study of UFOs. So it's interesting that I'm delivering it here. This conference is Contact in the Desert, and I mean, I've been at this conference many times. It's a very nice people. It's very new age conference.
It is. I've noticed that.
Hardcore, and so it's interesting because I've always had a very conflicted attitude toward New Age, anything. It's not that I think it's all nonsense. I don't. I'm married to a first-rate remote viewer, for goodness sake, and I've been interested in things like remote viewing and other. When you study UFOs long enough, look, you encounter a lot of strange things that really rip open your old paradigms. So. I'm not like Sam Harris. We'll just debunk everything. I mean, clearly right. I'm not that way, or Michael Shermer. Not at all. I believe in UFOs, and I believe in the power of consciousness in many ways relating to the UFO phenomenon. However, having said that, yes, I think that the New Age movement has caused real damage, serious damage to the UFO community. And that's going to be the theme of my lecture tomorrow.
Okay. By saying this, I do not want to reference any particular convention or promoter or anyone, but does the overall commercialization of ufology concern you at all? That there's interest that's growing in the topic. However, as that interest increases, there's more of a circus-like atmosphere that starts to surround it and maybe water it down and kind of delegitimize it, because the last thing I want to do is go to a convention about ufology to learn something and have it be more like ComicCon, which, no slam on ComicCon, it's cool for what it is, but that's not the purpose of ComicCon.
Well, I guess I'd say a couple of things. So one, I believe in people who are, if they're able to make money with a particular subject, they should have every right to do it. I think that's a good thing, not a bad thing. So I always laugh when people say, oh my goodness, so-and-so's got a book to sell. Well, like, what do you want? What do you expect? Like, what are you, 12 years old? Do you think no one's ever going to try to make money or a profession out of this? So the real issue is, do you treat it seriously or not? And no, there is a danger. I mean, there's a kind of, a lot of these conferences, look, people who set these up, they want to make their money on the conference. Why else would they do it? And they know full well, they pander. They'll pander to the lowest common denominator in many cases, and they want to know what's popular. And the sad fact is that it's not simply UFOs. This is widespread in our culture, that there's, a lot of people will gravitate to sensational, feel-good utopian ideas because that's what they want to hear. And so there's always going to be people who are interested in trying to make money out of that. And that is a problem in itself. When I'm talking about the New Age phenomenon, that's a specific part of the problem. And I think that's caused serious injury to the field.
Have you seen evidence that the CIA or any other government agency has been involved in the New Age movement?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've been really looking into that. And so what I would say is this: the CIA has demonstrably been involved in managing culture. Back in the 60s, the CIA in the 50s promoted abstract expressionism, for goodness sake. People art by Jackson Pollock and Rauschinger and these guys as a way to fight the cultural Cold War. So the CIA, through the Congress for Cultural Freedom, explicitly promoted abstract expressionist art, which is particularly at the time, people were like, "What? That's not art," you know, Pollock throwing his paint on the canvas and so forth. But they did that, and that was an explicit thing. We know they did it. The CIA was also involved in what was called Operation Mockingbird, which I think everyone should know about Mockingbird, and that was their manipulation of mainstream news media through managing spin, through editing, through fake news, which they explicitly, actively did for decades. So they managed, and they still do this, by the way, just not under that name. So managing art, managing culture, managing information. And of course, the CIA has been actively involved in mind control and occult type phenomenon through the 40s, 50s, 60s. Everyone knows about MK Ultra, but there are all kinds of offshoots and variations of MK Ultra, which are less well known and equally. I mean, we're talking about not just inadvertently, you know, slipping acid in someone's drink and pushing them out of the 10th floor window of the Statler Hotel, which they did in 1953, but we're talking about sensory deprivation experiments, which they worked through the U.S. Army. We're talking about going off U.S. soil into Canada to McGill University, where Ewan Cameron, head of the World Psychiatric Association, had what the nurses called zombie rooms, where they would essentially lobotomize and drug women who were simply going through menopause, drug them, and he did this thing called psychic driving, basically just completely obliterating these people's minds in many cases. So all of that was done by the CIA. I mean, horrible, horrible things. And then, of course, got them into remote viewing and psychic phenomenon in the 1970s, which many people know about. So the real question is, did they promote, UFO, New Age types of beliefs? And I think that the answer is yes. So, for instance, there's a great case to be made that they promoted or helped to promote the Jim Jones People's Temple cult, which there's actually some really good studies done.
Jim Jones he went to my high school. He worked in the hospital that I was born in.
Is that right?
My dad knew his sister.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to throw you, but Jim Jones is like a thing with me. Like, yeah.
Well, I'll just say that I have I have one excellent study on a detailed analysis of the connections between Jim Jones, the People's Temple that he had, and the CIA, and that this was an experiment, one of many experiments the CIA did in forms of social control and mass hypnosis, essentially, and mass control. So he was part of that, and then the whole thing went really bad in the 70s when independent congressmen like Representative Leo Ryan was like wondering what is actually going on there, because reports were coming out that this was not a legitimate type of a operation, and Jones was going to be found out and had everyone kill himself, or had them killed, as the case may be. But yeah, so that was a cult. And then you've got the CIA probably involved in this case, not New Age, but Christian organization called World Vision, Inc. And they're still around. Some odd things about them. They were run years ago by John Hinckley Sr., the father of the man who shot Ronald Reagan in 1981. And the reason this is interesting, that the late conspiracy writer Jim Keith did a lot of investigation on this. And so with World Vision, Inc., you've got a situation where Hinckley Jr. shoots and nearly kills Ronald Reagan, nearly puts George Bush Sr. into the White House. So Hinckley Sr. and Vice President George Bush were actually close friends, like very close friends. No one ever talked about that.
Wow.
Hinckley the Hinckleys and the Bushes were very close friends in general. Hinckley Jr. had a brother who was going to have dinner that night, I believe, with Neil Bush, one of the Bush brothers. These people were tight.
That's like incredible.
They went way back to Texas Oil Man days, back into the 60s, I believe. And so you got to wonder, like, what was that? And also what it turns out is that Mark David Chapman, the shooter of John Lennon, had been an employee at World Vision Inc. as well at one point. And so the question is, who's running that? Like, what was that all about, actually? In the case of Hinckley Jr., it was said that he had also worked at World Vision Inc. He probably did, since his dad was running it. So was there some kind of intelligence community element to that? Answer, I think yes. Was there a mind control element to it, at least at the time? And I would say, why not? Sounds like it to me. And then you've got the Heaven's Gate connection. Now, it's not that the CIA ran Heaven's Gate. I have no evidence that they did. But there's one man who actually ran the, I think he had hired 12 Heaven's Gate employees to create websites. This is in the late 90s when
I do recall that.
Yeah, he was arrested briefly, let out, ended up making a ton of money working with a guy named Nick Rockefeller. You may have heard of that last name, making millions of dollars in China. But in any case, his employee was the first one to discover the bodies. And there's a lot of suspicious things there. So when you get the Rockefeller connection, you have to wonder. But I'm getting a little off track with New Age. I don't know that the CIA is responsible for infiltrating the UFO field with the New Age phenomenon. What I will say is that we know that the FBI did similar type things with COINTELPRO. We know that the jurist Cass Sunstein, who was very high level in the Obama administration, talked about the need to infiltrate conspiracy groups and derail them. That was quite recently. And what I would say is that a number of the New Age philosophies that have come into the UFO field have definitely taken research off its game. And by this, I mean, you've got the predictions. You've got all of these people coming into the field, who make predictions over and over again. None of these predictions ever come out to be true. Not one. Why do people listen to predictions? Good question to ask. You have the whole build up to the 2012 ascension. Remember that? You were supposed to ascend. Your DNA was supposed to activate, whatever that even means. Your etheric strands of DNA, which don't exist, by the way, were supposed to activate, and you were to become a star being, a light being. And where are these people now, by the way? They're still out there talking about ascension. Like, why? Ascension is nothing other than a mass cultural death wish. That's all it is. It's a death wish, my friend. You want to ascend? How is that different from going to heaven? Or denying your fundamental humanity, by the way.
Or mortality.
Mortality, that's right. So it's a kind of enforced infantilism. And, to which I would just say, look, we have to grow up, deal with our problems. The world is a difficult place. Let's deal with it, not run away from it. But the real big problem with the New Age philosophy, and I treat it as an op. I don't know whether it is or isn't, but it is. It's really degraded the intellect of the people who are in this field in the following way. When you get the really strong New Age philosophies that have infiltrated this field, it's all about only seeing the positivity and avoiding the negativity. So that's great. If you're in a war in which this many people want to own every single thing in the world that's worth owning, that is a war. And that means they're out to steal every single thing that's not nailed down. And they'll do it, by the way. They are doing it. And as long as you're focusing only on the positive, you're not looking at the negative, because God forbid you don't want to give power to the negative, then great, you'll be powerless, and they will continue to plunder and steal and destroy every single thing that they're able to take. And this is exactly what's happening. So the philosophy is harmful. It teaches people not to look at evidence. It teaches people not to, how do I want to say this?
To engage in fantasy.
To engage in fantasy. Absolutely. Utopianism. The idea that somehow disclosure is going to fix all of our problems. And look, I wrote a book about disclosure. I never believe that disclosure is going to fix everything. It's could often make things worse. Doesn't mean we shouldn't have the truth, but let's not expect it to fix things, or to somehow expect human nature to change all of a sudden, and we're not the rapacious, bloodlusty people that we have always been.
It probably would have made it easier, that connection with the New Age movement, for the CIA to recruit talent to work for them, to keep closer tabs on ufologists that might be getting a little too close to real data, real evidence.
Entirely possible. One of the other models that that got me on down this little path here is the work by the late Dave McGowan, who did a really excellent book on the birth of the hippie generation. And his articles are on the web. They're called The Strange But Mostly True Story of Laurel Canyon and the Birth of the Hippie Generation. He wrote a book, I think, called Stories from the Canyon, if I'm not mistaken. And what he argued really well, I have to say, is that the mid-1960s hippie generation was in some measure apparently a creation of CIA and naval intelligence. And he made a really good case, actually. And really the point would be to derail the active peace movement that was then spreading across the United States, anti-Vietnam, civil rights, and so forth. Those people were not hippies. Those protesters were young, old people who just had certain ideals and they wanted to make the country a better place. But in 1965, 66, you have the explosion of LSD out of that region. People with the really long hair and the crazy clothes and turn on, tune in, drop out. Timothy Leary, who, by the way, was also seemingly, I think, connected to the CIA.
I met Timothy Leary once.
Oh, so
I got to spend about 15 minutes with him. We smoked 2 cigarettes.
That's very cool. I too actually met Timothy Leary and had a conversation with him on one occasion. Same type of thing. I was totally unknown and he didn't. We were just hanging out. I was just talking with him.
This is a major shift in topic, but I want to grab it while it's right here. Do you think the reason the government cracked down so hard on psychedelics was because I want to backtrack a little bit. I don't think psychedelics are for everyone. I don't think psychedelics should be used in a way that kind of trivializes their power. I think maybe they should be used for self-enlightenment, for self-education, for connecting yourself with the world, maybe not necessarily always in a ceremonial way, but always with a sense of honor and reverence for what can be shown through psychedelics. Do you think that they outright wanted to ban literally a state of consciousness?
Yeah, I tend to agree with what you just said there. I think psychedelics in general can be a great tool for people, and I mean, used wisely. I think it's a real danger when you start to lose yourself into that. That's a real problem because now you're not engaging in the world. Now you're going into your own fantasy world, and that's
once again engaging in fantasy rather than staying focused on what's in front of you.
And how is that different from a teenager who just lives in virtual reality video games?
Right.
After a while, you're just turned out of the world, and you're damaging your cognitive abilities in the process. But I think on a certain basis, yeah, it can be very helpful for sure. And you would want to treat it as a tool, right? As a tool to explore, and learn what you can about your consciousness, explore your consciousness in that way. Yes, I agree with you totally.
This kind of...
Well, I would just say my theory on psychedelics is that this door was opened in the 60s intentionally as a way to take people off their game, and that other drugs are much more preferred by the government, not the psychedelics. I think I agree with you. So like hard drugs have always been much more like heroin.
Yeah, you can predict what heroin's going to do to someone.
Yeah.
You cannot predict what LSD is going to do to someone.
Yeah, interesting point.
That's like Pandora's box.
Right. Right.
That kind of segues into a pet topic that I really wanted to discuss with you, and that is the idea that I like your term, the breakaway civilization. I don't want to use it frivolously just because you're here. I really do think that it is descriptive and accurate and to me, the mainstream media has completely ruined the term deep state. I don't even want to say the words deep state because now I'm hearing it on CNN every 10 minutes. But,
yeah, it's so true.
You know,
it's
like
so true.
they glommed onto it, and then they turned it around into something else.
And they turn it into a kind of a pejorative, like it's as if there's a deep state.
Just like conspiracy theory. I mean,
that's right.
You keep hearing conspiracy theory in every single segment on the news right now. Conspiracy theory this, conspiracy theory that.
Keep it. Here's something to add to conspiracy theories. The phrase itself was created by the CIA.
Yes.
The phrase conspiracy theory, this is true, I'm not making this up, Google it, people, was created in 1967 by the CIA. And the reason they did it was to disable the critics at that time of the Kennedy assassination orthodoxy. So there are people in the 60s who were like suspicious of the official government explanation of the Kennedy assassination, which, yes, you were quite right to be suspicious of that. And the CIA had a paper on how to deal with that. And they coined the phrase conspiracy theory as a way to smear those believers in this conspiracy theory,
to minimize it.
And it's stuck. I mean, so anyone who uses that phrase is precisely using a tool created by the CIA. So good for them.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. This brings around full circle this concept that by denying disclosure to humanity, the breakaway civilization denies humanity self-actualization, that we cannot reach our full potential as human beings. Why? Because of the petrodollar economy, because of the overstimulation of the media, because of the crazy left-right politics that gets people caught up into it, which is just another distraction.
That's right.
All of these things, it's just one thing after another. And I struggle because where do you define the difference between the old guy that wants to build the ship in the bottle, you know, the hobbyist guy? Mm-hmm. You know, we're human beings. We need something to do with our creative energy,
right?
Most of us. So we have to find some outlet. So I think that's normal and natural and healthy. Sure. But all of this technology and all this distraction is just sucking that away because you're not creating anything. You're consuming an idea. And it's a sickness. It's a sickness in people's heads. But it's preventable because you can turn this shit off.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Tasha. I would say, I just talk a little bit about the breakaway civilization concept. Yes, so the idea is that, you know, when you classify certain technological breakthroughs, particularly those that are concerned with the UFO topic, and we haven't even talked about UFOs, which is funny, but A, I believe in UFOs, and B, don't take my word for it. Look through the hundreds and thousands of pages of declassified literature on the phenomenon from your own government, that is the United States government military, which they talk about airspace violation after another by objects that are described as disc-shaped, silent, highly maneuverable, can't intercept them, perplexing and disturbing and so forth. And the documentation is cut and dry. It's not even, can't even argue it. So someone's got something that's not supposed to exist. It's there. On top of that, there's a very strong case to be made for some retrievals of these objects. And in fact, you know, people used to laugh at the idea of crash retrieval, but the New York Times last December talked explicitly about the recovery of metal alloys from these objects that were being studied by Bigelow Aerospace. So there's a confirmation of sorts. So no, this is not an unusual thing. So they're studying the tech. So now, you know, think about the 1940s, 50s, 60s, when they're denying this all the time to the public, but they're actually studying it and they're studying the tech. They make breakthroughs. Of course they will. Those breakthroughs become classified. God forbid, you can't let the public know you've got them. And when you classify a breakthrough, you are by the very nature preventing the public from pursuing that line of inquiry. So they're stymied and you keep going and keep going and going. And this is the thing about scientific progress. Like if you've got a key, a certain breakthrough that will allow you to make other breakthroughs. Next thing you know, hey, maybe they develop some form of field propulsion that is anti-gravity. They do that. Maybe they've made developments in material science that were classified because of what they discovered at Roswell or some other place. And so now they're able to go off-world, let's say. They go off world, they have encounters, they learn things. They've really become a separate civilization, which is what I argue, that one that's broken away from our own, hence the term. So I think that this is a real thing. And I believe furthermore that, they have gotten so far deep into this secret. I don't think they know how to undo it, even if they wanted to. I think it's so far gone. And I think it's part of the problem. As
you've mentioned on your show and in other places, the financial liability alone.
Yeah. I had a conversation with one very excellent scientist who's got a lot of classified experience, who knows about this stuff. And he just said, look, he was on a subcommittee some years ago. He said every 5 years or so, this comes up at the highest levels. And in other words, by this coming up, he meant, do we disclose or not? Do we tell the truth to the world? And he said, on one occasion, I was part of a subcommittee to deal with this. And it was a legal subcommittee, and he's not even a lawyer. But maybe that's how it goes. And he says, we decided, no, you can't, because lawsuits alone would be prohibitive, would be too much, too many angry people. And but on top of that, there's finance. I mean, you were saying our future is being held hostage, or words to that effect. So you've got this breakaway civilization, which costs money, by the way. It's siphoning money out of our civilization. I think that's the trillions of dollars of unaccountable, undocumented expenditures that the Pentagon. Right now you've got the story. A professor in the U.S. named Mark Skidmore and his graduate students, along with my friend and colleague Catherine Austin Fitz, who's a financial expert, former HUD administration official. They've discovered so far, through their detailed analysis, $21 trillion of missing expenditures from 1998 to 2015. That is $21 million of unaccounted for spending. Like, where did this go? Skidmore is astonished by this, and it's made the news. So I think some of that's gone into this secret program, and so I just want to finish this point and say, when people say, how do UFOs matter to me? Well, one of the ways they matter is that they've created this infrastructure where money is just leaving the system en masse, and that's your money.
Yeah, there would be no homelessness if that money were being used to help humanity.
A small fraction. Yeah. I mean, you could help the homeless. You could create an actual infrastructure that's worth having. I mean, could you imagine a nice high-speed rail system from New York to LA, for goodness sake? We could do it.
Right.
Totally could do it. We could do so much more. We could actually make this country a beautiful, beautiful place, a beautiful civilization. And instead, it's all going away into war, killing people, creating fake pretexts for wars, destroying entire nations and lives.
With all that being said, what can the average person do to navigate through all of this? How can the average person not get caught up in this? Because I think ufology is kind of like the thinking person's hobby in a way. It's a mystery. People love mysteries. Mm-hmm. They love to figure things out. It's more serious, I think, for people like you, because it's your career and you're doing serious research, you and many other people. But then there are the average lay people who are just interested in the topic, but they're not going to do anything about it.
Right. They'll catch an episode of Ancient Aliens.
Right, exactly. Right. And it's one thing to kind of carry that knowledge with you, but I guess I'm asking you, how can people take their ability to see through the system, to see the system that's created, to kind of keep them, and I don't want to be over dramatic, but I think it's accurate. It's enslavement. It's mental enslavement. How can people navigate through that and still make it through their everyday lives?
It's very difficult. So first of all, not everyone wants to do that. Let's just be clear. So there are a lot of people who are very happy with their lives the way it is. One of the biggest problems with success, like real success, is that it changes your life. And then you have to be different. Like, people don't appreciate this enough. Like, failure is actually really great in a sense, because you go back to being just the way you were and everything's the same. And that's what you know. You're familiar with it. When you succeed, when you really succeed, that changes your behaviors. that changes expectations, that changes your worldview. And that can be exciting, but it can also be a lot of work. And the fact is, not everyone's up for it. So the first question people should ask themselves, in all honesty, is how much truth do I really want? How much truth am I willing to handle? Because I can tell you, whoever is listening, that if you really were serious with that question, all right, you would have to strip away layer upon layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of illusion and lies and BS that is around you every single day. And that sounds extreme. I realize people listening think, oh my God, this is just out of control. But it's not. It isn't. I'm 55 years old. I have spent my entire life, and I mean my entire life, trying to understand history. I was a very serious student way back in my day, history and philosophy and literature, and my goal was always to be a professor at a university, and I did very well at what I did, and I studied a lot of international diplomacy and world history and much more. And I did well at it, and I wanted to devote my life to understanding this world. And I can tell you, it's hard. Like, it's really hard. So you go into a system when you're in your 20s to get your PhD in field of history, let's say. That's what I was working for. And it wasn't until I left that field in my 30s that I started to strip those illusions away. So it's, in other words, when I discovered, oh, there's this thing called UFOs that's real. Where have all the other historians been? Like, how is that absent? So what I'm just saying, and that's only the beginning, is UFOs. There's so much more. When you become a mature adult, you're probably not likely to want to have to reinvent your worldview too many times. Like, you want to think that you got it figured out. But I'm telling the listeners here that chances are you don't have it figured out. You think you do. You probably don't. I mean, people throughout history have always figured that they've had it figured out. Whether the ancient Egyptians 5,000 years ago, they knew that when the sun went down below the disk of the earth, that was the god Ra fighting the demons of the underworld. They just knew it was true. Well, okay, fine. Then we go through history and we realize, oh, well, that was a mistaken belief, and that was mistaken, and that was a mistaken belief. Oh, but now we've got it all figured out. Sure we do. The fact is, we don't have it figured out. So the first question is for each person to ask, how much truth do you really want? How dedicated are you? And be honest with yourself. Not everyone wants it. But if you do, if you are one of those people, if you discover deep inside that you have a hunger for truth, that you really don't want to be played like a fool for the rest of your life, then you have to have step one, which is to realize that you are being played, and that you have to understand the nature of the system around you, the corporate ownership, who owns what, understand what their agenda is. And that takes a long time to educate yourself. It doesn't happen overnight. So you have to understand that you're being played, and then you have to get outside of that system. So you have to go to truly independent sources of information, and you begin the messy process of trying to figure this stuff out, and you make mistakes along the way like everyone else.
Richard Dolan, it's been a pleasure and an honor to have you on the show. Thank you so much. I can't add anything to what you've just said. It's so strong. I just think that that's where this episode has to end. Thank you so much. You're welcome on this show anytime. Please come back.
Will do. Would love to. Thanks.
And that, my friends, is what it sounds like when Richard Dolan saves your ass when you're in over your head and you don't know what you're doing. He was so gracious, and I was so thankful for his time and attention. I just love that interview, and I had a very good time, and it was very educational for me. Don't forget to find me on Facebook, Mysterious Forces Live, at My Forces Live on Twitter. You can find me on Instagram, Snapchat. Please like this audio recording and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. And don't forget to activate alerts so that you know when we have a new show posted on the channel. As always, thank you for your time and attention. Please be safe out there, and we'll see you next time on Mysterious Forces Live.